Hello once again and welcome to the channel, and thank you for watching part 2 of my series about 1984. Now, as ever with my videos, if you're interested in the sort of subjects I talk about, be it music, records or technical, electronics, retro tech, anything like that, please hit the subscribe button because that really helps the channel to grow. And if you hit the little bell icon as well, then you'll be notified when the next video is published. Now, these videos I'm doing about 1984, I'm trying to publish them round about the middle of each month. It's a monthly series, and I kind of think if it's in the middle, then it's, 2 weeks in arrears, 2 weeks ahead, if you like. So this month is all about February 1984. Now, this month wasn't quite as big, I suppose, in many ways as January was, but needless to say, there was still a lot of great releases and a lot of stuff going on in 1984. Now, I've made a load of notes here, so I will be referring to this. And with the help of some online archives of things like old smash hits and my little collection of record mirrors, then we should be able to kind of piece together what was going on in this month. And if we look firstly at some of the releases that came out, now, there was quite a few, obviously, in this month, and I'm going to look at the first week of February. And as far as singles that were released, not a huge amount of big hits, but you did have Michael Caine by Madness. You had Marillion's Punch and Judy, which was one of their first charting singles. Genesis had a single, Illegal Alien, not their most well-known song, and frankly, probably not the best idea to release that as a single because it's kind of considered as one of the worst songs Genesis ever released. Another one-hit wonder, you could say, Carmel with More, 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 that came out in the first week of February. The Rolling Stones had a single out, She Was Hot, again didn't really do anything but had quite a fun video. And another song that came out on this week is the original version of Kiss Me by Stephen Tintin Duffy. Not a hit at all, although many regard it as being the superior version. But then a year later, then it did become a hit, as we well know. Now, as for albums in the first week, well, rock music was certainly something that was still very prevalent at that time. And of the 4 biggest albums of the week, 3 of them were rock albums. You had Slide It In from Whitesnake, Crusader by Saxon. They both had good chart places. The Whitesnake went in the album charts at number 5 and Saxon at number 18. At number 21 was the former Thin Lizzy guitarist and then current, as far as touring's concerned, Pink Floyd guitarist Snowy White with his White Flame album, and he had a hit single round about the time of Bird of Paradise, his only real sort of hit single, if you like, but that came out in this week. But the biggest album by far, which actually went into the album charts at number 86 in this week, is the debut album from Madonna. So we are talking, the early days of Madonna, but obviously, as we all knew, that album crept up and up the charts, and then when her follow-up album came out later in the year, of course, it went back up in the charts again. So yeah, the first week was kind of, not too bad as far as releases. Now, as for what was on television, well, if we look at the Tube, you had one of Sade's first ever performances was on the Tube this week. On Whistle Test, you had the Mystery Girls live in the studio, and you had some live performances from Wang Chung, and they also appeared on Sight and Sound in concert this week, which was at the legendary Gravediggers Club in Chippenham. And the Oxford Roadshow, they had a special all about Depeche Mode. So there was some good stuff on telly that week. Now, during Whistle Test of this week, Mark Ellen did a feature on memorabilia, as in clothing and other kind of stuff you buy, badges, T-shirts, stuff like that, really, and what was being sold and going around the markets of London. Because obviously, this stuff was a big seller, and also a lot of it was never quite official, and it still isn't to this day. But he did a chart based on many retailers of the best-selling T-shirts, and I found this really interesting, and I'll quickly run through the numbers, because quite a few of these bands still sell a lot of T-shirts now. But anyway, at number 10, it was the Anti-Nowhere League. Number 9 was the Doors. Well, the Doors, obviously, you can go to Primark and places and buy a Doors T-shirt. Number 8 was Eurythmics. Number 7 was Japan. Number 6 was Echo and the Bunnymen. Now, I would still say Echo and the Bunnymen are still a fairly relevant band to this day. And I think they're one of the bands that when they go on tour probably still sell a lot of t-shirts. Number 5 was Simple Minds. Well, they're still a big band and they still sell a lot of t-shirts. At number 4, it was David Bowie. Well, I think Bowie is probably still one of the biggest sellers of t-shirts in the world today. Number 3 was U2. They still shift a lot of t-shirts. Number 2, surprisingly, was Bauhaus. And but there again, they'd only just split up not that long before, so I guess people were still, you know, buying old t-shirts and whatnot. And number 1 was Culture Club. Now, I suppose they were probably the biggest band of 1983, so their merch would still be selling. But interestingly, some of the bands that weren't mentioned in this list were people like Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, The Cure and Depeche Mode, who I would have considered at the time would have shifted a lot of t-shirts, but as time goes on, they certainly would have done. And anyway, also on this week, Sight and Sound in concert. This is the second week of February. You had Sight and Sound in concert with the Boomtown Rats. Now, contrary to popular belief, they were obviously still thought of enough to be given a 1-hour show live on BBC Two, which, you know, later in the year when Band Aid was being discussed, of course, people thought, you know, Bob Geldof was a bit of a has-been. But, you know, there they were on television. The Oxford Road Show had Marillion live, as along with Marilyn, and a new band called The Farm, who obviously, you know, 6-7 years later had the big hit Groovy Train, but back then they didn't. And what else was on? Kool and the Gang and the Thompson Twins were on the Tube, and yeah, it was pretty good telly. Now, what was coming out of that week? Well, The Style Council's My Ever-Changing Mood came out as a single in this week, and it entered the charts at number 8. At number 24 in the charts came Howard Jones's Hide and Seek. 28 was Billy Joel's Innocent Man, but coming in at number 82 was Your Love Is King by Sade. And I think the performance of the Tube, like the week before, probably got enough momentum to get that first chart position. But then, of course, as word of mouth would have gone around, that single obviously whizzed right up to pretty much the top of the charts. So looking at the album charts of this week, and Sparkle in the Rain by Simple Minds, which you can see there, that was number 1, went straight to the album charts at number 1. Gary Moore went in at number 12 with Victim of the Future, another ex-Thin Lizzy member, along with Snowy White. Then in at number 16 was Thomas Dolby's excellent Flat Earth album, which, bearing in mind Hyperactive had been a really popular single the week before, the month before even, then it obviously helped the album get in the charts. But the biggest album that came out, other than Simple Minds, was Cyndi Lauper's She's So Unusual, which entered the album charts at number 51. Now, Girls Just Want to Have Fun came out the previous month again, and obviously the album ended up going much higher in the charts. And if we just follow on the rest of the month, then I kind of put them together really, but the following week, not many singles came out apart from Hello John Got a New Motor by Alexi Sale. And if you've ever heard the 12-inch version of that, or part 4, it has some rather interesting lyrics, shall we say. But as for albums in the third week of April, well, Into the Gap by the Thompson Twins, one of my all-time favourite albums, that went straight in at number 1. So Simple Minds only had a week up there, and then the Into the Gap album kind of pit them to it. And that kind of fits really, because the Thompson Twins had been on the Tube the previous week, and actually in this week, Fiction Factory and Big Country were both on the Tube. So yeah, they, you know, it did definitely help having your band on the TV somewhere and then your album coming out the next week. And I remember that Saturday when the Thompson Twins album came out, I was in the HMV shop in Exeter, and I remember hearing the track The Gap really, really loud coming out the speakers and just thinking, what is this? This sounds amazing. And that was, I think that really cemented my love for the Thompson Twins, hearing that song at that volume in the shop. And it's really interesting that a friend of mine in Exeter, he had been in the HMV shop at the same time, because we had this conversation about the Thompson Twins and he remembered hearing it at the same time. So yeah, it was one of these things, I think. You get on the telly, you hear the song in the record shop, and then people buy it, and that's what makes hits. So yeah, that went in at number 1. But there's some other big records that came out in this week as well. Declaration by The Alarm. It's My Life by Talk Talk, that went into the album charts at 35. And not that it really had a hit, but the album by Rockwell, If Somebody's Watching Me, the single again came out the previous month. But the album went in the charts at 83, but it was never really a big hit. But also we had albums from people like Palace and Hawkwind hitting the album charts as well. So, you know, rock and prog still very popular back then. Now I think we'll deviate a little bit here, and I'm going to have a look at a few singles reviews that came out in Smash Hits. I've also got some from Record Mirror as well. In fact, I'll read one from Record Mirror now because they had a guest reviewer, and if you can see, it was Morrissey. And it actually says singles rubbished by Morrissey. And I'm going to pick Your Love Is King by Sade, because obviously we know that went on to become a massive hit. And Morrissey says, do I get to know who it's by? And Record Mirror said, not till you've made some comment. Do you like it? Morrissey replies, oh no, it's a remarkably dull record. Record Mirror asks, is it a hit? Morrissey says, I couldn't possibly imagine this record being a hit. And then Record Mirror say, it's Sade. And Morrissey's last word on the subject is, well, I simply repeat the sentiment. I'm not easily swayed by trends. So he obviously didn't like it, and he probably was a little bit worried because obviously very, very competitive back in those days. And but I think he probably did recognise that as being a good song. But yeah, he's particularly condescending to most people on here. I mean, Hazel O'Connor had a single out called Don't Touch Me, and the Record Mirror asks Morrissey, have you got any career advice for Hazel? And his reply is, yes, take up window cleaning. So yeah, not you know, people say, oh, Morrissey's not very nice. Well, he was never very nice to a lot of people. Anyway, I'm going to look at some of the reviews that were in Smash Hits. Now, there's a really great website on Flickr which has got all the back catalogues of Smash Hits, and that's where I was able to get some of these from because I didn't have printed copies. And Neil Tennant from the Pet Shop Boys, who was then a writer for Smash Hits, and I think he just about formed the Pet Shop Boys, and he ended up leaving Smash Hits, I think, that year to continue with the band, because they did release a version of West End Girls in 1984 that wasn't a hit, thankfully, because it didn't sound anything like the version that did come out. But it's quite interesting reading some of the reviews in here, and one that tickled me was his review of Wouldn't It Be Good by Nick Kershaw, because he says, I'm really getting sick of all the 12-inch singles. I've only got the 12-inch version of this, and it seems to drone on forever. Their design editor tells me great things predicted for this chap, but I can't see it myself. Not on the basis of this anyway. The tune is too predictable and dull. Maybe the 7-inch version is better. Now, what's interesting, Neil Tennant says he doesn't like 12-inch singles. Bearing in mind, within a couple of years, he would go on to make some of the greatest 12-inch singles of the 80s, certainly of the late 80s. I just found that, slightly amusing. But if we look at the album reviews, and as I said, the aforementioned Into the Gap by the Thompson Twins that went into the album charts at number 1, well, the writer Dave Rimmer gave it 2.5 out of 10 and said, Thompson Twins' Into the Gap, in which you will find several songs with empty words and plodding tunes, sung in a whiny voice and slung together with fake sentiments. The success of the Terrible Twins represents the usual triumph, naked ambition over talent, standard issue, manic stares, and at least one stupid hat might pass muster on top of the pops. They hardly brighten the experience of having to sit through an LP as deathly dull as this, a sad business. Well, it went on to become a massive seller around the world, and people are still talking about that album today. There's another review here about Thomas Tolby's The Flat Earth, and it says, unfortunately, this LP is not packed full of lightning tracks like Hyperactive, instead of a bit like trying to drive into a strange town without a map. It tends to veer off unpredictable directions. Not a bad thing usually, but in Tom's case, it ends up sounding just messy, a real disappointment. Well, again, you be the judge of that. I think The Flat Earth's one of the great albums. And yeah, it's very interesting that how things are kind of perceived. And also in this month, Martin Ware from Heaven 17, he also reviews the singles. And let's find something that went out to become really big. And well, it's his review of Hyperactive by Thomas Dolby. Brilliant produced single from Thomas. It has a highly original factor and deserves to be a big success. However, one can't help thinking that chart buyers aren't willing to accept a record that doesn't appear to have an identifiable chorus. Well, that's pretty astute, really, because yeah, he likes it, but he's not 100% sure whether it'll sell or not, which I guess was probably, fair comment. And so let's see what he says about the Twins, Dr. Doctor. Their last single was my favourite record of December '83. They seem to have hit on a formula which will amaze their ever-growing success for some time to come. In my opinion, not as good as Hold Me Now. I wish they would feel obliged to dance about. No, I wish they wouldn't feel obliged to dance about so much. So again, not enjoying their stage performance as the other reviewer. Now let's have a look at Echo and the Bunnymen's The Killing Moon. My first reaction was yet another Doors rip-off, but after listening to it all the way through, I think it's better than the Doors. I can't profess to ever having been a Bunnyman fan, but they go some way to changing that. A brilliant cover as well. The A-Team say they quite like it. So yeah, the cover I'm guessing must be the artwork on the cover. Yeah, had pretty good artwork. So yeah, Martin Ware obviously seems to like the charts a bit more. And then there's another bunch of reviews here from Limal of Kajagoogoo, and he ended up making his former band single of the week. I think he was trying to be polite. But let's see what he says about Marillion, as they brought out their single Punch and Judy. And it says, this group hail from the same part of the country as the Cadgers, but their music is totally different. Well, what's quite interesting is this month, it was announced, I think last week, that Nick Beggs, founder member of Kajagoogoo, is actually playing with Marillion because Peter Travis is having some sort of operation and he's standing in. So it is quite funny that a Kajagoogoo member is actually playing with Marillion 40 years after Limal wrote this review. Anyway, it says here they'll be looking at their first hit, but to my ears, I don't think they'll get it with this one. And again, I think that's perfectly valid because I don't think Punch and Judy is a hit single. I think Market Square Heroes, the earliest single, could have been a really big hit, and possibly Garden Party. But obviously, a year later we had Kaylee and Lavender, and of course they were massive hits. Let's have a look at the albums from this issue of Smash Hits, and this I think is a review that I think is this is from Mark Ellen, and he's talking about John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Milk and Honey, which was kind of the leftovers from Double Fantasy, really, that they Yoko put together. And Mark Ellen's very scathing and only gives them 2 out of 10, so not very liked here. And another album that came out that's reviewed here is Van Halen's 1984, which got released at the end of January. And it says, among non-heavy metal personnel, guitarist Eddie Van Halen is highly spoken of. 'Twas he who contributed the nitty solo to Michael Jackson's Beat It. He certainly can play, and for those who like this sort of thing, 1984 is perfect. Overgrand, US stadium-style rock and roll, not my cup of tea, 4 out of 10 by Dave Rimmer. Well, that's exactly what they became, stadium rock and roll, selling millions of tickets, millions of albums, and you can't get better than that if you want to be a rock star. Anyhow, let's go back and take a look at the last week and what was coming out in this month in 1984. And we had some interesting singles. Julia and Company, Breaking Down, Sugar Samba. Not a big hit, but it ended up on Now That's What I Call Music 2, which is how a lot of people know that album. Tracy Ullman released her cover of Madness's My Guy, which had the famous video with Neil Kinnock in it. One big banger that entered the charts at number 47 was the Weather Girls' It's Raining Men. still every party you stick that on, everyone gets up and dances. And then you had Robert De Niro's Waiting by Bananarama, which entered the charts one place behind at 48. And at 76 was Would-Be's by Scritti Politti. And so that came out quite a bit before the album that it featured on, Cupid and Psychic 85. But as for the albums, well, at number 40, Julian Cope's, I think it was his first solo album, World Shut Your Mouth, didn't have that song on it. That song came later, but the album came out into the charts number 40. Keep Moving by Madness, that entered the album charts at number 6. And the biggest entry of this month, number 2, was the debut from the Smiths. Now, having a look through various copies of Record Mirror and Smash Hits, you know, Morrissey was certainly, you know, a big star, having been pretty much unknown. I mean, there he is on the front cover of the February 84 edition of Record Mirror, and he certainly made the front pages of Enemy, Melody Maker, Sounds, and Smash Hits. And when you think the first Smiths single came out in 83, that was quite a big rise to this level. And it wasn't just the fact that the Smiths were a big alternative band or indie band, they crossed over into the mainstream very quickly. And that, I think, opened the floodgates to a lot of other sort of alternative bands going into the mainstream, or certainly ones that had crossed over but then got even bigger. And I'm kind of thinking like the Cure, the obvious one, Echo and the Bunnymen, and then later on we'd have bands like the Jesus and Mary Chain, etc., etc. But yeah, Morrissey was a big deal, and saying this album got to number 2, and it only didn't go to number 1 because of Into the Gap taking that place for a few weeks. So yeah, it was a pretty busy month. As I said, not quite as busy as January, but there's still a lot of great records that came out and stuff happening in that month. And if we just look at the last bit of TV, what do we have then? Well, we had Whistle Test, we had live performances from the Cocteau Twins, and also there was a feature with the late great Benjamin Zephaniah, who recently passed away. Sight and Sound and Concert had a live gig from Aswad, and the Oxford Roadshow had the new lineup of The Cure, which featured Andy Anderson on drums, Phil Thornalley on bass guitar, and Paul Thompson on guitar, keyboards and saxophone. And I think that was one of the first TV performances of that lineup of The Cure. And obviously that lineup carried on all the way through 1984 with them doing the live concert album and the album The Top. And then towards the end of the year, Andy Anderson left and Boris Williams joined the band. Well, certainly by mid-85, Boris was in the band, and I think Simon Gallup had returned as well. But at that time, it was that lineup of The Cure. Anyway, hope you found some of these facts and figures interesting, and if you have, please hit the subscribe button, and I will be doing a playlist of this video so you can go through it at your heart's content and watch all the other episodes as I make them. But for now, thanks for watching.